Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In this particular video, we are going to go over some camera basics. We are going to go over exposure. Now, maybe you've taken a shot that has been too dark. We call that underexposed, where the camera didn't capture enough light. And conversely, if your photo is too bright, we have captured too much light, rendering it overexposed. So I'm going to break down each and every component for you in this video and hopefully give you a better understanding of how exposure works and how to make sure you capture the right exposure in your photos. Now, there are three main components that consist of your exposure, more commonly known as the exposure triangle, and that is ISO, aperture, and your shutter speed. If you can properly balance all of these, you can get a really nice photo exposed properly. Now, first on that list is ISO. Let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit more in depth. Now, the way that I like to think of ISO is essentially digitally brightening the image. Think of it as increasing the screen brightness on your phone. It's done digitally versus the other two in the exposure triangle, which is f-stop or your aperture, as well as your shutter speed. Those are mechanical aspects of the actual camera, whereas ISO is more of a digital aspect of increasing your exposure. Now, this is something you don't want to take lightly because increasing the ISO, the digital brightness of your image, naturally increases grain, as we call it, which is also just kind of like a grainy pixelated noise in your image because it's digitally enhancing the data from your photo. Generally, you would like to keep this on the lower setting. Every camera is quite different. You may want to do some tests with it to see how far you can push yours before the image starts to get really noisy and grainy and to a result that you don't like anymore. More or less, the general rule of thumb, at least with all the cameras that I've used, has been shoot with or shoot below 800 ISO whenever possible. However, new cameras are coming out and they are getting really good with noise reduction, even at significantly higher ISOs. So depending on the camera that you have, just kind of keep that in mind as you go out and shoot and kind of test those settings. This is something I actually really recommend, especially if you're just getting into photography or if you just bought a new camera. Kind of learn these basics, go out, test them, see the limits of your camera and how far you can push them for the result that you like. I know there's a few photographers out there, sometimes including myself, depending on the look that I'm going for, where I have no problem boosting up my ISO quite a bit to actually get that sort of grain and noise into my image. Sometimes it could help tell the story of the image. So don't take it as a bad thing per se, but like I said, just go out, shoot some photos, test with the camera and how far you can push those limits before the image becomes essentially not usable. Now, have you ever wondered when you see some photos, it's got a really nice blurry background? Well, that is called bokeh. And you get that through a function on your lens, which is called aperture or f-stop. Now, this may be a little bit confusing to get because the numbers are a little bit backwards in terms of your f-stops. Now, what these basically mean is how much light is let in through the lens and into the sensor of your camera. Now, there are blades on the inside of your lens that open and close, and the smaller the hole is, the less light that is going to come into your sensor. Conversely, the wider the lens is, or the wider the aperture blades in the lens are, the more light is going to be let into the lens. I have a lens here and I'm going to show you essentially how those blades work. So we can see here, as I move this here, you can see it gets a little bit bigger and then I can make it a little bit smaller, just like that. Those are the blades within your lenses. And so like I said, the wider the blades are, you can see a lot more light is able to come into the lens and hit the sensor, giving you a brighter image. Now, going back to that bokeh that I was talking about, which is that nice background blur, the wider you have your lens, the more depth of field you're going to get, which is going to give you that nice bokeh effect. This is something you'll see a lot of the professionals use. It really helps your subject stand out because you're a lot more focused on whatever's right there in focus, and everything else behind them is nice and blurry. Now, the way that the system goes as far as numbering and f-stops on these lenses is essentially the wider the aperture is, the lower the number. So for example, this is an f1.2 lens, and as you can see, it does open extremely wide. Whereas if we were to actually make it a little bit smaller like that, it's going to be significantly higher. This is going to go all the way up to f16, which is going to let in significantly less light than at f1.4 or 1.2. Usually you're going to have a range on your lenses, and if you don't know where to find this information, it's actually on all lenses on the front. Let me see if the camera will focus here so you guys can see that. It's trying to focus on my face, but there you go. You see, there are some details in the front of the lens that'll tell you 25 millimeters, 1.8 on this lens, and your filter size. So in case you are to get a UV filter or a polarizer or something like that, you'll need to know the filter thread size on the front of the lens so that you make sure you buy the proper one. All that information is on the front of your lens, so refer to that if you are unsure about yours in particular. Now, the third piece to this exposure triangle is your shutter speed. You can kind of think of this as a curtain next to a very bright window. As you open that curtain, you're going to let a lot of light in. Conversely, as you close it, there's no more light coming in, right? So your shutter is actually right behind the lens, and this is something you can control. There are a wide range of shutter speeds you can pick from, and essentially what the speed does is it controls how fast your shutter opens and closes. So when the shutter is open, light comes into the sensor, creating that image, and when it gets closed, it completes the image. So I have a camera here, and you can go ahead and actually see. Let me turn it a little more towards the light. There we go. When I hit this shutter button, there we go. I have it on a really slow shutter speed right now, and because it's open for a much longer period of time, you're allowing a lot more light into this camera sensor, basically causing the image to be a lot brighter. But let's say we go ahead and actually speed up our shutter speed. You're going to be able to see right here, you see it open and close really quickly. And that's also where you get that shutter sound. It's when you click your shutter button and it snaps the photo with that curtain going up and down, basically capturing your photo and the exposure from that photo. So like I said, the faster you have your shutter opening and closing, the less light is going to be let in. Conversely, the longer you have it open, a lot more light is going to be let in. So it allows a lot of control in a lot of different situations for you to get a really good exposure. So if you were outside, like let's say at a beach during the day, you're naturally going to want to use a faster shutter speed because there's already so much more ambient light readily available that if you were to use a slow shutter speed, well, it's going to be really, really overexposed, and that's not something you want. And on the flip side, if you're shooting indoors, or let's say the sun's going down and you're outside, there's a lot less light available, you're going to want to slow down your shutter speed just to help you get a little more light into the sensor. So basically, with the exposure triangle, you're going to want to balance all those elements, which is your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture. You're going to want to balance all of those and make sure that you get a proper exposure for your images using those techniques. Well guys, that is going to wrap up this video here. I hope you found it useful and maybe learned a few new things in regards to exposure you might not have known before. With that said, I'm going to leave you with ViewBug user Lost Lens, who recently won a brand new camera with one of our contests. If you guys are interested in entering in those, I'll put a few links down below. Who knows? You could be the next winner.
Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Lost Lens and I wanted to share with you my experiences on ViewBug. Recently I entered a creative photo competition and I had won a Nikon D7500 and I was completely shocked and amazed that I had won. I was so thrilled and I just wanted to say thank you to ViewBug, and it's an amazing platform that everyone should use, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.